Hey everybody, I have Jordan with me. We're over at the Banya in Freehold. So I was telling Jordan a little bit about our conversation this morning, the video regarding iodine and real salt and that stuff. And I figured we'd bring Jordan on the conversation, add some enlightenment here. So the reason why we're sweating, we were just in the sauna, so about 220 degrees in there right now. And those of you that have been attending seminars know all the great benefits. So we'll be hitting that and the cold plunges. So we figured we'd record a little bit and get some insight here. So Jordan, why don't you just talk a little bit about what we were talking about on the way over as far as things that would block iodine in the body, things that are super common and even good for you, and just that much more reason to take even more iodine.
Right. So there's a few things that block iodine uptake in the body, and some of them you generally consider pretty healthy, like cruciferous vegetables, for example, have chemicals that can lower thyroid hormone circulating in your bloodstream. And you can overcome that by taking more iodine. So if you're eating a lot of cruciferous vegetables on a daily basis, it's probably a better idea to take more iodine than the average person would be taking. The other one, a big one, is fluoridated water. Fluorine can take up space in the thyroid gland because it's a halogen, just like iodine is. It's on the same group in the periodic table, has similar properties to iodine. So it can block the conversion of certain molecules in your body into active thyroid hormone. Those are the two main ones that most people encounter.
Okay. So just in general, if just, this is probably going to be a question. So this is not scripted, by the way, so I'm just going to ask questions along the way. And this is sort of how conversations go with me and Jordan, just give you guys an insight. When we hang out, this is what goes on constantly. So this would be just another reason for people to buy a good filter for their water. Would that filter out the fluorine, or will it escape through would it escape the filtering process?
Yeah, fluorine is hard to filter out. It's a really small molecule. The fluorine atom is really small, so it can go through filters pretty easily. But you can definitely filter out fluorine with things like reverse osmosis, distillation.
Or just buying like Poland spring water.
Or buying, spring water. Things like that. That's the best way to avoid fluorine.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, we're living in a society where all of the water is fluorinated, pretty much,
well,
right?
All the tap water is fluorinated, and even some water bottles are fluorinated, depending on the brand.
Okay, so we're talking about a molecule that by default is literally in the water that's going to block iodine. So if you want another reason to take more iodine, there it is. You talked about cruciferous vegetables. Obviously, these are good for you. This is another way to block iodine. Why don't you just tell them a little bit of the chemistry involved here, what's happening? It's okay if you get a little technical, because then we'll also talk about broccoli sprout seeds, which I've brought up on many occasions, including the last video. But again, this is another reason to make sure you're taking that much more iodine.
Yeah. So there are compounds in chemistry, the elements in the group with iodine are called halogens, and these halogens can all interact with the thyroid gland to a certain degree because every element in a group has the same properties or very similar properties. Then there are also things called pseudo-halogens, things that imitate the chemistry of how the halogens act. And one of those things is called isothiocyanate, and isothiocyanate is found in cruciferous vegetables. And upon digestion, it can release isothiocyanate into the bloodstream, which can block the absorption of iodine because it has such similar chemical properties to it. It competes for its absorption.
Okay, cool. So when we've talked about broccoli sprout seeds and sulforaphane, myrostanase. Can you just talk about what's sort of going on there and the breakdown of these cruciferous vegetables so that people understand what turns to what turns to what?
Yeah, so there's a compound called glucoraphanin in cruciferous vegetables that is broken down by the enzyme myrosinase, and that turns it into sulforaphane. But there are also a lot of other side products. But the one with the main benefit is the sulforaphane in terms of like health benefits. There's also things called nitriles that it can break down into. Those aren't very bioavailable, and they probably don't have many health benefits because of that. So those are the main pathways that it breaks down.
Speaking of bioavailability, talked a little bit on the video about how non-bioavailable iodized salt is. It's somewhere along the lines of 10 or even 10 or 15% bioavailable to many people's estimates. Can you just talk a little bit about why, how much more bioavailable things like kelp is compared to something like an iodized salt?
Yeah, the kelp itself, not only is it more bioavailable, it also has a higher concentration per volume. So if you're eating this iodized salt that has like potassium iodide or something added to it, you're not going to be absorbing a lot of it. It's not really that optimal of a dose. Versus eating just a small amount of kelp can give you close to 1,000% of the daily value of iodine. So even in terms of concentration, it's more. The bioavailability is a whole other thing. It's mostly more bioavailable because as you digest it, it's held within the plant matter and it's released slowly over time rather than all at once.
So just to remind you guys, that product that I obviously don't have it with me, but the product I held up in the last two videos, that kelp, it's like a kelp salt. That is a kelp-based product, so it's going to be much more bioavailable. So again, we were talking a lot about this all really got brought up, talking about thyroid issues. Can you talk a little bit about iodine and why it's so important for the thyroid? And you don't have to get super technical, but just give people a little bit of insight as to what's happening there.
Yeah, well, so there's a couple molecules in your body that use iodine, and those are the only two molecules, I should say, are T3 and T4 thyroid hormones. Those molecules have iodines literally on the molecule. So obviously if you don't have enough iodine, you can't be building those molecules. And that's the main reason why iodine is important for the body. Your thyroid needs it to manufacture those hormones. But it's also beneficial in other organ systems as an antioxidant, as a detoxifier. It has a lot of benefit for cells too.
Okay, excellent. All right, so that's a little bit of an insight there onto iodine. Since maybe we'll extend this conversation a little bit. Since I have Jordan here, we'll pick his brain a little bit more. In the last video, we also talked a little bit about magnesium. I was very specific talking about magnesium for heart health, mitochondrial health. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but normalizing blood pressure. George, why don't you talk a little bit about magnesium in terms of the forms of magnesium? I brought up magnesium oxide as opposed to glycinate or malate, and just in general the importance of magnesium. We talked a little bit in the previous seminars, its importance in ATP and ADP and just in energy production. But why don't you give a little insight into magnesium?
Yeah, so magnesium is an extremely important ion in biological systems. In fact, when you talk about standard conditions, and I do this in my biochemistry classes, when you talk about standard conditions of a cell, you always consider the magnesium concentration because it's used as a cofactor for so many enzymes, for so many biological reactions. So it's really hard to understate how important it is as an ion. But its main role, like I said, is for the production of ATP, for being a cofactor for certain enzymes, even for things like the MTHFR, it's used as a cofactor. So. So that's magnesium as a broad thing. It also can lower blood pressure because it relaxes the blood vessels. There's a receptor in your brain called NMDA receptors, and those are wakefulness promoting. Those cause excitability, and magnesium can block those. And that's part of the reason why it has like that semi-sedative effect when you go to sleep.
Is that in any form, magnesium in any form, or specific to glycinate, or would it be more?
So the other part of the story is how bioavailable the source of magnesium is that you're getting, and the main ones that are seen as the most bioavailable are the citrates, the 8s, citrate, glycinate, malate. All of those are really good. The ones that you want to avoid are chloride, oxide, hydroxide, and sulfate. All of those are going to cause, sometimes bowel disruption because of osmotic things in the intestines. It draws water into the intestines. The other ones are transported using different transporters in your intestines, and those don't cause that osmotic pressure difference in the intestines. So those are the best ones to get for bioavailability.
Excellent. When you just brought up MTHFR, so MTHFR, people are familiar with this specific to what do you call it? Methylation issues. So a lot of people don't realize that this is actually a gene, right? That's in the body.
Yeah.
And why don't you just talk about more specifically how magnesium might help people with MTHFR? How is that possible? How does that work, other than the methylated B vitamins?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the main reason why it's not so much that it helps the function of the actual enzyme downstream or methylation or anything so much like that. It's actually just a cofactor for the enzyme. So without adequate magnesium, the enzyme is going to be slowed down. It's not going to function well.
Okay. So give me an example. If somebody's low in magnesium, how would this affect somebody with let's say 2 alleles of MTHFR? What might happen there?
So if you can imagine an enzyme model for what this enzyme is doing, this folate synthesizing enzyme is doing, it has a binding pocket that kind of can change its shape to accommodate its substrates. And one of the substrates is magnesium, one of them is ATP, and one of them is the folate, turning it into the methylfolate. The magnesium, there's amino acids on the protein structure that are specific to the binding of the magnesium ion. So if the magnesium ion is not there, the actual enzyme doesn't have part of its components that it needs to undergo the reaction. That's the reason why it would affect the function.
And maybe last thing on magnesium here. Just talk a little bit about its importance for mitochondrial health, and we talked about the heart a little bit, about the demand that the heart has and why there's so much more mitochondria in the heart as opposed to, say, certain other parts of the body, and how that could help. Maybe just also talk a little bit about how and why it would help to regulate blood pressure. If just along those lines, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so when you have these certain ion channels in your body and muscles contract and release, the heart is working the hardest of pretty much any muscle in your body. It's constantly moving and constantly pumping. So because magnesium acts as a muscle relaxant and also a vasorelaxant, it relaxes your blood vessels, it's very beneficial for relaxing the heart. I mean, if you imagine you don't have enough magnesium, which is the main thing that is going to relax those muscles and those blood vessels, then your heart's going to be under way too much stress all the time. It's not good.
Excellent. Outstanding. Well, I think that's enough for today. So when you guys, when Jordan shows up to seminars, he just gave you a good reason for you to show up yourself, because you can ask him questions. Jordan really likes talking to people one-on-one before and after the seminars. So he's a wealth of knowledge. I'm just going to show you guys, there's nothing in front of us. So this was unscripted. We're not sitting here reading off anything. But this is how a typical conversation goes with us when we get together and we talk for a few hours about lots of different things. So next time we run a seminar, if Jordan's there, if you guys show up and want to ask him your own stuff, feel free, because I certainly take advantage. All right, guys, have a good rest of the day.